Welcome everybody to this episode of the Women in Technology Spotlight. Today I have with me Karin Brunotte. She is a Senior Technical Account Manager at VMware. Welcome, Karin.
Hello, Wonka. Thank you very much for your warm welcome. Yes, glad to be here.
Thank you for coming on my show, Karin. It's so nice to have you here. Let's tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
I live in Munich with my 9-year-old son, and I work in IT since almost more than 20 years now. And yeah, that's a long time now, and I experienced a lot of transitions, a lot of changes, and I'm still here.
Okay, so that's great because you can give us a little bit of insight on how IT has changed in that time. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But before we do, tell me a little bit about how you became to be a woman in IT initially. So tell us a little bit about your education, how you grew up, maybe a little bit about your family background.
Yeah, well, my family background is absolutely non-IT, not a non-technical background. My parents traveled a lot, so I had the chance to see a lot of parts of the world. So I grew up also in Brazil and in Europe, in different countries, in Dubai. So during my first 13 years, I traveled a lot. So I had a lot of, let's say, a lot of impressions and a lot of ideas what to do in my future and what not to do, of course, also. What I actually did when I went to school in Germany, the last years, and then I started an apprenticeship, a 3 years apprenticeship in, how you call it in English, it's industrial electrotechnique at a big automotive company in the north of Germany, and some people will know what company that is.
Do you want to tell us, or shall we guess?
It's Volkswagen.
Okay.
And I started my career there with almost 16 years. So I started this apprenticeship very early, and that was for me also very clear right from the beginning to start a technical career. I was not a typical, let's say, typical girl that just plays with boys or everything like that. That was not the case. I was a very typical girl with but still I thought that the technical career would be something that I really like, that I find really interesting. So I did a lot of experiences during my childhood, tried out a lot of jobs during my vacation from school. So I gained a lot of experience. So I was very clear when it came to the choice that I had to make for my future career. And then I did this apprenticeship for 3 years. And I was still very young, almost in my 20s. And I noticed that working in the industry was very difficult for me. I was too young. I wanted to have a career, and people were not, let's say, prepared for someone that young with a clear path in front of her. So what I did then was I tried to figure out if there are any options for me, which I could actually start beside the industry. And so I started thinking about IT, and I started to read a lot about that. I went I went to companies. I called managers from IT companies. I still remember that as a very young woman, asking them what you need to do to start a career in IT. And they were always very surprised, but that actually helped me a lot. So I started a kind of education, a 1-year education that at the end gave me the possibility to do this certification that you at that time was something really, really new, and the companies were really after that. I don't know if people remember this Microsoft certification, MCSA, these kind of certifications. So that was my first touch with the IT branch, and I noticed then that you had this had a certain dynamic. So I started this education, and during that time, I already started talking to companies, and I already had a job before even finalizing that education. So that was the point where I said, also my parents said, "Oh, it looks like you're on the right track." That's how it all started.
That's there's a couple of things in there that I found interesting. So first, you had a childhood that was how can I say, full of travel and changes. So do you think that this part of your youth shaped you in some way? Because I feel you're very outgoing, and you also seem very confident, because as a young woman you called different companies, and that's not very common, you know, at least not.
Absolutely not.
Tell me a little bit about that, how that maybe shaped you, or do you think that shaped you in some way?
Yes, absolutely. I think you have less fear when you have to go through a lot of changes, have to change your friends, have to change the location where you live, different languages, and then you get used to that, and you're not afraid anymore of that. And calling companies and these kind of things was also something where I now think, wow, I wasn't afraid of doing that. I still had, I was someone who always prepared herself. I wrote things on a blog, and sometimes I even wrote the first sentence down. So I was on the phone and then reading the first sentence from my blog, and then I started talking automatically and naturally. But that was definitely something that helped me a lot. And also my parents always encouraged me and gave me a lot of ideas. My father liked to go ride by bike, and when he went through with the bike through the city, and he saw a company that might look interesting for me to talk to, and then he wrote it down and the address, and then gave it to me. Said, why don't you call them and ask if they can help you out with someone, give you new ideas or something like that. So there was a lot of, I think the most important thing is information. If you have information, you have a choice. If you don't have information, you cannot choose from anything.
That is so true. Information is power. Interesting, and even more so today in this new world where everything is based on information. And what you just described with, you know, getting accustomed to changes, different languages, different people, different schools, and I think it underlines the fact that you're very resilient. So you became a very resilient adult. And this brings me to this question. You said you did your apprenticeship and you were 16 when you started. So 3 years, you were maybe 19, maybe just starting to 20 when you were done. And you were looking for a career in this automotive field. And you say people weren't prepared for that. Tell me a little bit more about that, because, you know, I know women in tech tend to have a harder life, but you're a resilient person. You still switched. Tell me a little bit about what happened there.
When I finished my education, this 3-year education, I wanted to continue in that area, and it was very difficult because I got the chance to have a lot of interviews, and it was like something that they invited me and they looked at me like they were very curious about my ideas and why, but then they didn't have the courage to give me the job. It was something like, I think it's interesting and the people were curious, but maybe they thought I would not be able to fulfill it, to complete it, or maybe I would change my mind, something like that. So they were not trusting the young person they saw in front of them. And this is where then I decided to say, okay, it's like, I think there's a saying, I don't know the correct, I can't say it correctly, but it's something like about, you have to be like water when you have to have a direction, and if water flows regardless what's in front of it, so it's either goes this way or that way, and
but it will continue to flow. Yeah,
it should just continue to flow, and you have your direction, and you find a way. Yeah, don't be stubborn, don't stick to only that way, just find your way around it, and sometimes it's even a better chance.
This is also part of the resiliency, I think, you know, that just you don't stop because of obstacles, you find a way to go around them and continue. Do you think it was only because you were young, or do you think it was also because you're a young woman?
Both, yeah, absolutely. A young woman. I think that these two things. Maybe if I would have been older, I don't think I would have had the chance anyway.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so interesting, because you went from one male-dominated field to another male-dominated field. Obviously, IT is also not really balanced in terms of gender, but your experience seems to have been different. Was it different when you switched into IT?
Absolutely. I had to deal with totally different people. They were more dynamic, more open to diversity. I noticed that from the first minute. The way the interviews were, they were more friendly. They were more in a way respectful. They were in a way that you really wanted to be treated as an employee, and they were really interested, not only curious but interested in me as an employee, and that was a huge change. When I noticed that, I thought, okay, now I'm on my that's the right way. And that was a very good decision.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you started out with the Microsoft certification, and now you're a senior technical account manager at VMware, which is another topic entirely. Tell me a little bit about this journey from this first certification you made to where you are now. What happened?
Yeah, a lot, actually. So that was really a journey. I started with that. Almost a little bit more than 20 years ago. So the typical path is you start as with an IT service provider. So that's normally the first years where you gain a lot of experience with different products, and you have the chance to see also a lot. So I started as a consultant, as a junior consultant. So I had to travel a lot, and I went to different companies, and it was always like being thrown into cold water. You go there, you have no clue. And you start your first day, like, hopefully no one asks me anything. But of course people do, and you have to handle that, of course. And you start with it. Of course, you don't do projects alone. You start with a more senior colleague, and so you start simply your way and get along. And then after 1 or 2, 3 years, you have a totally you feel comfortable. You know what your job is expecting you, and you know also what your strengths are. You start learning that, and you start to specialize and feeling more comfortable when you go to customers. And I think that's the good point. And also the fact that if you start as a consultant, you have the chance to see really so many customers, and then you start seeing, okay, so they actually have similar issues, similar challenges, and you learn from one challenge. You have the chance to bring then your experience from the other project, and so you keep gaining experience and keep also gaining resilience, and that's how the whole career goes. And from that first way, I went to the next IT service provider. Had there again like almost 5 years, and working within different fields, also gaining new certifications, and also broadening your experience towards project management and these kind of things. So it was not that much. I never had that specialization in a very technical point. I also had the intention to work towards project management and these kind of things. So and challenges. And so that's how it all went. And after that, after the first almost 10 years in with IT service providers, then I made the step towards a vendor or a software company. That was again a huge change. The expectation was much higher, the quality you had to deliver, and everything. The expectation was much higher. So that was a jump almost.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing you talked about, the fact that throughout these years, when you work with different customers, you don't necessarily gain more in-depth detail knowledge, but you broaden your knowledge. And in the end, this is your what you bring to the table, this knowledge of different customers, the different environments, and and how to structure projects. And I think since you're now a technical account manager, this is all something that you can build upon in your role, right?
Absolutely. So you start gaining, on the one hand, you have your skills your technical skills. And on the other hand, you also have your soft skills. So it means your personality, something that really, 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 let's say, goes a step beyond. So you start, you may be a shy person. I was a very shy person when I was young, a very quiet and shy person. Then by being thrown in the water every time again and again, so you're more resilient, and this helps you in your personality. You learn from colleagues how to handle when you're afraid, or when you're very excited, when you have to do a presentation a lot in front of a lot of customers. And doing these projects again and again and repeating again and again helps you get confidence, and then this changes your personality. So you gain on a technical basis, but also you gain on a personal basis, and that this helps you a lot. And if you have, let's say, an idea of what your strengths are, and this is something that keeps building and keeps growing more and more over the years, is that you have an idea of and what you're really good, and then you get the feedback from the people and say, oh, that was really good, and you say, oh, well, really, I wasn't seeing that so much. Especially we're women, we're very skeptical when it comes to own performance, and you never know, oh, was I really good or not that good? You always find something that could have been better. And this is something that I also started learning from men, from my male colleagues, is not being so critical with yourself. And when it comes, when you have your stage, use your stage, and don't feel shy, don't feel small, because they take the whole space, and you should do the same. And if they do mistakes, they say, well, yeah, that was a mistake, sorry, and just go ahead, right? They don't stop and feel like they have to regret something. And these were also the parts that I learned a lot during the last 10 years, especially in these kind of project management fields.
Yeah, I think you talked about soft skills, and this is one of the most important things you have to develop nowadays if you want to work in a role like ours. I mean, because even though we're in tech, we work with people. And I also love the fact that you said you were very shy when you were young, because I was too. And if people meet us nowadays, they would never think that. And this also reminded me of a topic that I feel is very important for people to understand, that you can push your boundaries, that you don't have to remain the same, that you can develop skills, like, for example, talking in front of people, a lot of people, because I do recall the first times that I had to do that, I was a nervous wreck, and now I just do it, so this is a progression. And every time you go to the limits of what you're familiar with, and you just go a step further, you learn more, and you develop these additional skill. And I think and I would like your opinion on that. I think those are nowadays even equally or even a little bit more important than just the technical skills in these roles. What do you think?
Absolutely. What I say to people that start thinking about career in IT, or even starting their career at all, I always try to figure out, okay, what are your strengths? What's your personality? Are you someone that is able to structure things very well? Are you someone who, when you come into a room and people tell you things, are you capable of understanding what they're telling you, and maybe breaking that down to 2 or 3 things or topics? Are you even interested in people? So these kind of questions are more important, because the technical skills, the way operating systems work, the way how networks work, all these kind of things you can learn if you're kind of interested, and if you're motivated, you can learn everything. You can learn Chinese, you can learn everything. So a new language, simply everything. But you have to have this motivation. You have to have an idea of where you have to figure yourself, to figure out where you want to be one day. You have to have this vision. This helps you a lot. And the skills, also always being curious and interested. I think that's the most important thing. And that's when you gain your personality, or when you develop your personality, you can see within the years, okay, do I like what I'm doing now? I want to do do I want to do something that my colleague is maybe doing? So you always also have the chance to see what the people around you are doing. If you're in a big company, you have a lot to choose from.
Yeah.
So you can always see what others are doing and trying to find out if that would be something for you as well.
Yeah.
And as I said, like doing always repeating things, like going to different customers. And that's a good thing about being a consultant. You always start from scratch. You always have the chance to do a kind of reset. If your last project was not that well, you go to the next project, and then you can start from scratch and simply do it better.
True. You can always build on the background you've already acquired. And there was another thing in there that I always also found really important to talk about, and this is how women approach things. And you said, for example, that we tend to be too critical with ourselves, that we don't take enough space. And I think there was something else you mentioned, which is so these typical female behaviors. And I love that you talked about that, because that is also something you can learn, obviously, to work differently, to take up more room, and to be more confident, and stop criticizing yourself for every little mistake and just move on. So did you feel that this helped you in your career when you understood these female traits and started to work against them?
Absolutely. The difference between maybe me and maybe other women that study longer, I started working with men since my 16th birthday. So I started learning that very early. I was always surrounded only by men in the working environment. And what I noticed that they are so confident. And I was like, oh my God, how can that be like that? And it's something like you really have to learn, and you do it step by step, copying simply what they do. When it comes to your salary, for example, I worked in a company where my colleagues were very, let's say, open when they talked about their salary, and it was like this, and I was saying like, oh my God, I'm like here and they're like that over there. How come? And the point is, when you are in a company and you have this salary gap, there's no difficult way, or almost no way that you can, let's say, close that gap. You simply have to change a company to do that. So if you notice that gap, you have to change the company, and then you simply start with a higher salary. Mm-hmm. And if you have to be prepared when you go to an interview. You have to know everything about the company, because I think that's something that when we women start something, we're always prepared. We're always very well prepared, and this is something that we have as a plus, definitely. So when I talk to managers that did the interview with me, what they told me afterwards was always, you are the one that was best prepared. And I said, like, how come? I mean, it's obvious that you prepare yourself. I still remember myself sitting in the plane in the morning, having like a book like this and learning the network OSI model. And that was like so many things you can still do to be your best during an interview.
I was wondering, since we were talking about being a woman in the field, and gender gap is not only in terms of how much money you make. This is the obvious things, but were there other things? I mean, you said you have a son, for example. Were there other incidents or where you noticed that it's difficult for a woman maybe in the field?
Yes, absolutely. When you decide to have a kid, then of course things always change. I think this is an experience that I had. I was not counting with that so much, because during my pregnancy, I talked to my managers. I went in conversation with my company, and still there was a difference when I came back. So it was not the way just continue with your job and your career still the same way how it was before. There was a difference, definitely. I noticed that. Mm-hmm. And then you really have to ask yourself, okay, what do I want? Do I want the security to stay in that company, or do I have enough security in the background so I can decide to change the company? Mm-hmm. Or do maybe it's even better for me to step back a little bit, to have more more time to get used to my new situation, because the kid is always changing, always new challenges, and it's a lot of joy, but also the challenges keep up with with the joy as well. And so it's, especially when you're working full time, then you have to you have to make this experience. But I still think that the experience I made the years before, that's almost 10 years ago now, it's not the same anymore as it is now, because men now are taking time off, paternity leave and all these kind of things. So the companies are more used to that, the processes are established, and you're not the first one. I was the first one in my department because I was the only one, so I was obviously the first one. There were no processes. I know for all these, my managers did not know what to do. So of course that was very, very new. And
yeah,
I think
sorry, go ahead.
You have to be tough. You really have to be tough. And I think you have, I think it's important that people don't take that too personal. And this is something that I learned as well, because I took it personal. I was disappointed. And now when I would do a recap, I would say, don't take it too personal. Simply keep your eyes open, rather for the next opportunity, or live with it and say, okay, then I have concentrate more on both on my private and my job life. So.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point, and that would take me to my final question, because we're already nearly at the end of our talk here. And that is what your recommendation would be to these young women who are now coming into the field. You already mentioned something, don't take it personally, because maybe your manager just doesn't have any experience with working with someone like you. But since you have this progression, and you've seen the field change, what is it you would say to young women who are interested in coming and working in IT?
I think what I think is, my experience is, it's a huge field. It's a great field to work in. The companies are very modern. They're very open. You have so many chances. You don't need to be a nerd. You don't need to be perfect in mathematics. You have to have your soft skills and an idea of what you like to do. If you want to work with people, if you want to work with technologies, you have really so many opportunities. And one thing that I've learned is you have to stay with your opinion. You have to stay motivated, and don't let the focus go of what you want to achieve, because you will have obstacles. There will be people that will not take you serious. There will be people that may be very personal, or you will have obstacles. But I think if you stay strong, if you stay by yourself, if you are authentic, and keep your opinion about what you can do and what your strengths are, I think then you have the best way, and then you have everything to start a great career, or even at least, let's say, do something that you love. It's not necessarily needs to be a career, but it should be something that you like to do every day.
I love that, and especially the focus on understanding what you want. And I think that's a very important thing for young women to learn about early. What is it that I want, and not what the others want? And then it's easy, I guess, to stay with yourself, and not take things personally, and just go along your path. Yeah. And I wish I had known that earlier. I would have maybe, done things a little differently when I was younger, if I had spent more time thinking about what I want and what I need in my career.
I think this is always like something you can only do when you do a recap, because this is something you don't know at that time. So it's a little bit of try and error. That's about life. You run into one direction, and then you say, okay, it's not working. You go to the next one. But I think this is also important, not to take this as a failure. It's an experience. You made that experience. You figured out it does not work for you, and take the other experience the other way around.
Yeah, that's also something that's important, to understand that you can always change direction if things are not working the way you would like them, right? So thank you so much, Karin, for coming on my podcast. It was a pleasure talking to you. I could have gone on longer, as usual.
Yes. Same to me. Thank you so much for having me. It was really a great talk. The pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.